Our first trip leads from the Epic Hotel in Tbilisi to the former northern capital Zweti, and we start with this small ancient church Zchoweli. It stands on a ridge of the mountain range Zagoramo, opposite of Zweti, at the confluence of the Kura and Aragvi, where the San Nino erected a large, highly visible wooden cross in the 4th century. It is said to have been here up to the 6th century under a canopy on a stone pedestal in the shape of an octagon. It survived and stands today in the center of the church. In the second half of the 6th century, the Prince of Kartli, Guaram, who is shown here on an old coin, built a small church next to the cross with a crypt. This no longer exists. After excavations, the place was located further north of the church, as this map shows. She soon became too small, and so donated his successor Stephanos I, end of the 6th century, a much larger church in the style of the Holy Cross, as this plan shows. His brother Demetre and his successor Adarnase I completed the construction in the 7th century. Today is just this great church to see, whose founders are immortalized on relief images on the east side of the church. Across the center window, Jesus Christ is blessing the kneeling Stephanos, left is Demetre, and right is Adarnase shown with his son Kobul. Two other interesting reliefs are located on the south side above the main entrance. The relief with two angels and the cross represents ascension to heaven, a common motif in early Christian art. A light slope of this cross outside indicates the completion to heaven by the relief cross inside of the church. The second relief image is above the narrow windows of the south portal, showing the founder Stephanos I with the kneeling son of Adarnase, Kobul, the later Stephanos II. Next to the church are the ruins of a wall built to protect the church grounds on the east and south. The sketch gives an idea of the arrangement. The location directly on a steep slope offered a natural protection to the west and north. Nevertheless, it was in the 10th century by Arabs, badly damaged by fire and restored only in the 14th century. But the average of time set on the stone blocks. They were broken over the centuries and its forms lost its classical clarity. Therefore, a general overhaul was carried out in the 80s of the last century, still in Soviet times, including the stone surfaces. But unfortunately, the exterior walls show after only 30 years again strong erosion, which is certainly also caused by the exhaust gases from the many cars of daily visitors. Indeed, the church can only be reached by car. It is a popular destination due to its proximity to the capital and provides the newly arrived visitors a very good insight into the ancient church history of Georgia. Between the various tourist groups you can find here is this one armed with video cameras or hordes of tour groups. Against their noise level, David is difficult to understand. To visit the interior of the church, we wait for a quiet moment. The cross on the octagonal base strikes us first, which stands exactly at the center of the dome. The interior's four walls reflect the building's exterior. Also, the church is only 20 meters by 16 meters, it looks larger. The dome's 25 meter height helps. The huge central cross features wooden relief motifs depicting Georgian church history. The entire interior is very simple, just a few icons to bring some color to the bar stone wall. Even the equipment of the sanctuary is kept simple and without pomp and splendor, as if nothing was changed in the past centuries. Also, the native octagonal stone pedestal of the 4th century is simple hewn rock without any adornment. The four corners each have specific uses. The southwest corner was reserved for women according to a 6th century inscription. The visit to the church Zchoweli, what Holy Cross means and refers to the origin of the sacred Nino, has led us to a unique structure at the beginning of our journey. According to experts, it represents the culmination of artistic achievements of the early Middle Ages and had no precedent. With the clarity and logic of the architecture, the richness of the facade's relief ornament, and perfection of masonry, Zchoweli belongs in the circle of the masterpieces of world architecture. Alone the location is exceptional and very well chosen. The church grows like a crown out upwards from the rock massif of the mountain hill. From the church we have a fantastic view of the ancient capital Mskheta and our next destination, the Zweti-Zchoweli Cathedral. In the 4th century, Georgia's Christianization by St. Nino began here, undeniably the most significant historical event in the country's development. On the short drive to Mskheta, David briefs us on what is next. This, along with some research, gives us the historical perspective. Back in the 3rd century, there were two great kingdoms in place. Kolchia in the west was under Roman rule, and Iberia in the east with its capital Mskheta under Persian influence. The city was not only at the confluence of the river Kura coming from Turkey, with the Aragvi coming from the Great Caucasus, but also at the crossroad of the Silk Road and the northbound Heerstraße, which we will see later. This strategic location has already led 3,000 years ago to the city founding. From the 4th century up to the 5th century AD, Mskheta was even the capital of the Iberian kingdom after Tbilisi took over this rank. Up until 2008, here was also the seat of the Georgian Patriarch. In the heyday of Mskheta was a rich city. Today it has only about 7,000 inhabitants. The ancient fortress walls, palaces and building ruins, and necropolis from Hellenistic and Roman times, and especially the well-preserved church buildings, make the city a major attraction in the world tourism. To understand how this came about, we have to go back even further in history, even before the time the city Mskheta was founded in the 4th century BC. After the conquest of Jerusalem by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II, 586 century BC, many Jews fled to the Caucasus, also to Iberia. Georgian kings granted them land for colonization. Over the centuries, a frequent movement of certain elect Jews for Passover to Jerusalem, where they became aware of Jesus of Nazareth. In the year 30 or 31, Elios, son of a Jewish widow, traveled to Jerusalem and was a witness of Christ's suffering. He bought, by Roman soldiers who guarded him on the cross, his robe and took it to Georgia. Back in Georgia, his sister Sidonia saw the garment, tore it from his hands, pressed it to her chest and died instantly. It was impossible to wrest her the clothes again, so it was so buried in the garden of the king. According to a legend, a great tree grew out of the grave under which the holy Nino 300 years later sat, and the story thus finds its continuation. She is the legendary figure of the Georgian history who converted the East Georgian king Mirian of Iberia to Christianity in the 4th century. Her father was a Roman general and her mother the sister of the Patriarch of Jerusalem, but they lived in Cappadocia, located in present-day Turkey. The Roman Empire at that time had its greatest extent, and it is amazing how far Nino was already traveling. At the age of 12 years, she came to Jerusalem, where she was brought up by the diaconess of the church where Jesus was buried. There she learned about Christ's suffering and the legend that a man from Mskheta had bought his robe from a Roman legionary. During the persecution of Christians, she was arrested and taken to Rome, where the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared to her in a dream and instructed her to travel in the assigned country and convert the pagans living there to Christianity. She fled and traveled by land via Armenia to Mskheta. For their protection, she received a carved wooden cross made out of wine. In Iberia prevailed at that time King Mirian I. His palace stood where today is the Zweti-Zchoweli church. The king worshipped the Caucasian god Amazi, for there was a temple here in Amazi-Siche. Siche is the Georgian word for fortress. The floor plan of the temple was reconstructed during excavations. When Nino arrived, she came across this pagan cult for Amazi, and King Mirian would not hear from Christianity. She was very sad, but the king allowed her to live in his park. Here, in the park of the palace, she lived in retirement and healed the sick, which gave her a legendary reputation. She refused all gifts and entertainment and remained in her hut next to the grave with a robe of grass. Two events are said to have convinced the royal couple from Christianity. When the queen fell ill and no doctor could help her, Nino healed her by prayers. And when King Mirian was wrapped in the hunt of a darkness, probably an eclipse, Nino and Jesus came into his mind and he could see again. He decided to be baptized and sent a messenger to Constantinople. Emperor Constantine, who allowed 313 Christianity and was baptized with his wife 337, sent the Patriarch of Antioch to Georgia, who performed the baptism and appointed a bishop in Iberia. Because Nino often prayed and meditated in the rose garden, King Mirian decided to build on this very spot a tiny chapel. She stands still today without much changes in the field of Samtavro Church. It is the oldest Christian sacred building and also the first doomed building on the Georgian territory. The Samtavro Church was built in the 11th century and was a main church of the nuns. Here in the small chapel are the sarcophags from King Mirian and his wife Nana. Today a seminary is here. The three-story bell tower was also used as a watchtower. Later, Nino withdrew into the mountains and traveled to other parts of Georgia. She converted the Queen of Kakheti, where she died in Botbe 361. The site is located south of Sinagi, and we visited it on our journey the next day. King Mirian had built on her grave a basilica by the name of St. George, which later became the Eparchy or Diocese Botbe, and that still exists today. The marble coffin with a Holy Nino is here in this small space. In the ornate church, extensive restoration took place during our visit. The Assumption Church dates from the 6th to the 7th century. It was rebuilt in the 8th century in a three-nave church. The bell tower and the building to accommodate the about 30 nuns of the convent were built in the 19th century. The tall trees here in Botbe remind us of the miraculous healing sap from the cypress on Sidonia's grave in Mskheta, where we turn now for another legend. This concerns the naming of Zweti-Zchoweli Church, which means the life-giving church, and goes back to the time in the 4th century when not the magnificent church as of today stood here. During restoration work in the 20th century, foundations of a small wooden church from the 4th century were found. This had Nino erected on Sidonia's grave after introduction of Christianity 337. This required 7 trees are cut down, including the one on Sidonia's grave, which not want to fall. Nino prayed, an angel arrived for the fall of the tree, from whose bark a healing juice against diseases of all kinds ran. Hence the name of life-giving tree or church, which was acquired over the centuries for the future new buildings and still holds true today. About 100 years later, the already known to us King Vahdang Gorgasali built a 3-nave basilica on the foundations of the wooden church. During the restoration work in the 20th century, both this as well as the foundation of Nino's church was found. The apse foundations were uncovered there as well. A reconstruction drawing indicates how the basilica might have looked from the east line of sight. During the occupation by Arabs in the 8th century, it was destroyed, shortly afterwards rebuilt again, and received during the 11th century the shape as of today, as we found it during our visit. The church is located behind a crenellated wall with access by the imposing west gate, which is decorated with replicas of the original bullhead. Once through the gate falls the view of the west side of the church, which has received some interesting ornaments over the centuries. The rosettes seem to remember the sun god Amasi, but dominant are the various miniatures of the church prayer at the grave of the Lord in Jerusalem. In addition to the St. George's cross, the symbol of the life-giving tree or vine for which the church is named appears on the south side. Interesting and enlightened is this relief on the north facade. Almost inconspicuous can be seen with an inscription above the peacock, a reference to the main builder Arsukidse. This reads, "The hand of the servant Arsukidse, forgiveness." The legend describes the cruelty of the king's vizier who had taught Arsukidse about architecture. When he saw the overwhelming beautiful facade of the Zweti-Zchoweli church, he realized that his pupil had surpassed him and ordered that his right hand be cut off. From the cruel vizier speaks today no longer a man. The builder and his church are against it so well known that visitors come here from around the world. Men may the Zweti-Zchoweli church not enter in shorts. At least one towel as a skirt replacement must be tied. The interior is decorated modestly and takes in many places related to the history since Nino's appearance in Msreta. Filming was not allowed, so only a few pictures and moving images. To the right of the altar, there is a very small replica of the Holy Grave Church. It was built for those believers who could not afford the pilgrimage in the Holy Land. It is reportedly directly on Sidonia's grave with a rope of Jerusalem, on which Nino had built the very first church in Georgia. In the 17th century, Sidonia's grave was further suggested north, under a higher pedestal for women. On top rises until today a small stone canopy that supports a column which gave the church the name the Life-Giving Pillar. The floor is partly covered with glass plates in order to make parts of the old foundations visible. They have evolved into modern victim sticks as suggestive of the many coins. At various points, remains have been uncovered of columns and decorations and bear witness of the architecture of past centuries. The frescoes still well preserved in part, dating from the 17th century. In the 19th century, all the walls were plastered and whitewashed, which was removed in the 20th century. As a result, this well-preserved mural painting became visible again. In front of the altar, wall grave slabs of the kings of the dynasty of Khosroids and Bagratids are to visit, from Georgia's oldest royal families. Even the to us well-known King Vahdang Gorgasali is buried here. From the sacristy, a stone cairn leading to the church vault, where a maze of secret rooms was created, in which, won in enemy raids, the church treasures and refugees were hidden. In the substructure of the building, there are such secret hiding places as well. Zweti-Zchoweli had been repeatedly desecrated by enemies and destroyed, but always rebuilt or restored. 1283, the cathedral was heavily damaged by an earthquake. What had been preserved was destroyed by the hordes of Tamerlan, a descendant of Genghis Khan from what is now Uzbekistan at the end of the 14th century. In the first half of the 15th century, the king of Kartli, Alexander I, arranged the restoration of this unique cathedral. In the 17th century, the dome was rebuilt, which completely disintegrated in the 19th century. Only in the middle of the 20th century began extensive restoration work that lasts in principle until today. Today, this jewel of Georgian architecture can be viewed almost in its original state of the 11th century. The visit of the cathedral is a reason for so many tourists from Georgia and abroad to come to Mtskheta. In the streets, the usual shops with souvenirs from the city and vicinity exist. Everything is very clean and well ordered. The visitor will not be pressed or harassed to buy something. If you are lucky, you can even film the owner of the business and their children once. As there is now noon, a very pleasant smell of shashlik pulls through the streets and animates for a short rest. David has but picked out another restaurant which is equipped with a simple but very effective ecologically sound air conditioning. A permanent easy spray on the open outer wall makes for a pleasant coolness and humidity. On special request, there was a Georgian specialty, hinkali. It is dumplings where a tasty and savory meat sauce with a dove is cooked. How to eat them explains David on the living object Gela, with the active participation of Tina, who is also aware of this dish. So keeping it a bit tilted, and if you bite carefully a piece out, you can suck the meat sauce. The dove will not be eaten, which is why you always have to find a sufficient number of these pies to fill you up. Those fortified, we leave Mtskheta by a very modern path towards Xiongvime and get past the nunnery Samtavro where King Mirian had built a small church for Nino. Soon behind, a strange monument appears in the middle of the mountainous landscape with the Georgian and US flag. The area is fenced and next to it is a huge sign with a red and white horse. Only a small plaque records the significance here is to be reminded of a fatal accident firefighters in the United States and Georgia who came by terrorist attacks killed. A least unusual situation where in principle only visitors to the monastery Xiongvime pass. The distance to the cave monastery is indeed only 12 kilometers, but the gravel road demanded everything from the drivers and the car, but also by us passengers. Diversity includes partially beautiful but arid landscape and today the unusual cloud formation. From time to time we encounter even a car, likely with tourists who return from the monastery, because this way you have to go back again. Considering the monastery's remote location in front of the rock wall in the background, the road is in relatively good condition due to ongoing road work with heavy equipment. One has to be careful passing. And then we reach the site of the monastery Xiongvime, which is picturesquely situated at the foot of this cliff, and dive again in the legends and stories about the Christianization of Georgia in the 6th century. While Christianity was already almost 200 years the state religion, but had not yet everywhere and already established permanently, even a return to paganism practices has been observed. We are now in front Xiongvime Monastery. This is a monastery with two churches. The first church that we see is the St. John the Baptist Church, and the second is the Holy Virgin Mary Church. In the 6th century, 13 holy fathers arrived from Syria to strengthen the faith of the people. This was a time when we were under Persian rule. Also, there had been Christians since the 4th century. Some people found their faith weakened under Persian pressure. The Persians were sun worshippers practicing Zoroastrianism, whose founder was Zarathustra. Christians were harassed, meaning that it was an uphill battle for the Holy Fathers to encourage Christianity or build churches. One Holy Father, named Zchio, had wealthy parents who helped fund these Christian endeavors. The Holy Father's influence spread far, primarily in eastern Georgia, in the Kartli and Kakheti region known for wine. Their churches can be seen still today across eastern Georgia. This monastery was built by Zchio.
Wir werden jetzt bald sehen, in welche Verhältnisse der Zchio gelebt hat.
Zchio lived here in the cave, in harsh conditions, alone and a virtual prisoner. According to legend, a dove brought him food and water, and maybe people did too, while he suffered in the cave for 40 days. As a monk, Zchio later had many devotees. One of them was the wealthy governor of the Kartli region, who helped finance Zchio's church. And where we were now going up the stairs was nothing built between 541 and 555 during the time of King Pasmans VI, but there were only natural caves. As David told us, Zchio moved in one of those caves to examine himself whether he is up to the challenge to live here. According to legend, this resulted of a dream in which the Blessed Virgin Mary and the Holy Nino appeared and ordered him and his brothers to evangelize the country. When he had prayed, starved, and fought in his nightmares against the devil for 40 days, the Holy Virgin appeared to him again and released him. His steadfastness and devotion spread to the governor of Mskheta and the king, and he received enough gold for building the monastery and the construction of the first church dedicated to John the Baptist. It is a small cross and square church with an octagonal tambour. It is 3 quarters underground and was extended in the 11th and 17th century. The small bell tower was only erected in the 12th century and converted in the 17th century. The second church in the upper part of the monastery is dedicated to the Virgin Mary and was built under King David the Builder in the late 11th century. The architect was Arsenius from Ikalto, the Georgian master for all churches at the time. The original doomed church was destroyed by the Persian Shah Abbas, but shortly afterwards rebuilt without the dome. In the western part of the church there was once an opening whose diameter was only 0.7 meters. From there a 10-meter-long corridor was leading to this room of 4.5 meters in diameter, where the mortal remains of St. Zchio were buried. The grave is closed with simple bricks. According to another legend from the period of the Persian occupation in the 17th century, the remains of Zchio were stolen and brought to Persia. When she suddenly began to shine there with a halo, they were again brought back here. Today live in the monastery only 11 monks. The large holes in the rock wall not only served the monks of the monastery, but also the farmers from the area and even residents of Mskheta as a hiding if ever invaded by hostile powers, so very often. The visit and the history of Zchiongsvime, which means Cave of Zchio, with the 2 churches in this seclusion, was very interesting and impressive. Also taking into account the arrival and departure today in relation to the hardship that have taken Shio and his brothers 1500 years ago in order to introduce the Christian faith in the heartland of today's Georgia permanently. With a return trip, our first excursion outside of Tbilisi ends. We have thereby gained an impression from the beginnings of Christianity and then incurred buildings here in the Caucasus. What we have seen, heard and have researched is part of this video, but is only a brief summary of a long evolution until Georgia as of today.